Hello, folks. This is Matt Hart, Town Manager again. I apologize for the delay. We're going to begin now. The development and our longtime town engineer, and we have other members of our engineering staff here with us this evening as well. I think I see Greg Summer and Julie Vieira, and if there are any others, Dwayne will introduce them in a couple of minutes. So tonight we're hoping to have a good conversation with you all. Joe and Cindy have prepared a very thorough presentation. They are going to periodically pause to take questions and engage in Q&A. The mayor and I do have a couple of council meetings this evening, so we will be on for a little while, but then we're going to have to move along to attend those meetings. But the staff will fully brief us, and hopefully we'll be able to hear some of your initial round of questions as well. And then lastly, before I turn to the mayor, I'm sure many of you are going to wonder when we get to the recommendations point of the meeting here, how are we going to fund? How are we going to fund the projects? And we see this as a long-term project to make the improvements we're discussing. That is something that we are very committed to. And you may or may not know, the town has an existing capital improvement program, or CIP. We have a 12-year plan. And we use that capital improvement program to fund a whole variety of major projects and initiatives. So we do have monies already allocated for stormwater in the CIP. And, we'll be looking to build more and more of these projects into our larger capital plan. And that will be the primary vehicle that we will use to finance these improvements. So let me pause there and next turn to Mayor Sherry Cantor, who has a welcome of her own. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you to all of the residents that have signed on. We really appreciate your taking the time this evening to learn and to listen and to ask questions. This is a big deal. I also want to thank our town staff, Dwayne, Greg, Julie, the rest of the staff that has worked really hard on this for a long time and will continue to for a long time to come, and CDM Smith for your guidance and expertise. I really, this takes a lot of engagement to understand because it's not an easy issue. It's a complicated issue that has gotten more acute over time because of extended periods of rain. We have been experiencing more and more issues with stormwater. This has been an issue in West Hartford for a while, but not to the degree and surely not to the extent. So I appreciate you taking the time to learn, to listen. And I know when these things are happening either in your street or in your home, they are the most stressful, kind of experiences, and it's really challenging. I have experienced it personally, and it's really hard. But I will commit and let you know that this council is very committed to solving this problem and remediation over time. It's not going to be tomorrow, but what I think this study will show is that these things are all interconnected and interrelated, and we have to do them in an organized and logical fashion so that we are fixing sort of the bottom first and then building up to the top. So again, I thank you all for being here tonight, for listening and learning, and for your time, and of course your patience and investment in West Hartford. And we really do care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and we appreciate your leadership over the past several years in helping to get these important projects funded. I will now turn the virtual microphone over to Mr. Martin, again, our Acting Director of Community Development and our town engineer.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. I just wanted to get a few points out to the people that are attending or listening to this after the fact, just to clarify before I turn it over to start the formal presentation. So the first thing is I want to point everybody to the Town of West Hartford's web site and then the Engineering Division's web page. And on that web page is a tab for drainage and stormwater management. And within there is another tab for drainage studies. So if you navigate Town of West Hartford, Engineering Division, Drainage and Stormwater Management, Drainage Studies, there's a lot of information in there, including the full 3 studies and other information. We will continue to add to that web page over time for residents and others to refer to. So there'll be a lot of good updates as time goes on. So that's the first thing. The second thing to point out is these are studies. So they're very important. They create the pathway for the town to navigate to a solution to these drainage problems, but it's not a construction project at this point. It's going to take some time to go from here to the construction phase. We have to do surveys, obviously design, permitting, and allocating the funding and prioritizing the improvements, which we'll get into some of that as part of the presentation towards the end here. So the point is, because I've been fielding phone calls and emails about, is there going to be construction for my house? There may be at some point, but we're just not there yet. We're working towards that. We're also working in collaboration with the MDC. So we've been in communication with the MDC. There's sometimes confusion over why properties or basements flood. And sometimes there's an interrelationship between the drainage system, the sanitary sewer system, groundwater, etc. So we're trying to work collaboratively with the MDC moving forward as we're committed to improving our drainage system. What we're interested in doing is getting the groundwater out of the sewer. If we're installing new drainage on a street, we would like to have that groundwater flow into the drainage system that is there, as opposed to into the sanitary sewer system. Oftentimes the sanitary sewer system will surcharge and can cause flooding in basements, in part because of heavy rain events. And so sometimes there's confusion over what's causing basement flooding. We'll go into that in the presentation as well. And then lastly, before I turn it over to CDM Smith, the reason we have CDM Smith as a consultant for 2 of our drainage studies is they're big and they can be very complex. For example, this one, which is referred to as phase 2, involves 3 very large areas of West Hartford. For this meeting alone, for those 3 areas, we sent mailings to invite people to this meeting, and it was approximately 2,000 property owners, just to give you an idea of the size of West Hartford that we're talking about for this drainage study. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Liberty and Cindy Bauman from CDM Smith to start the formal presentation. So, Joe.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Martin, very much. My name is Joe LaLiberty. I'm with CDM Smith. And Cindy, if you can go ahead and share the presentation. Here with me tonight is Cindy Bauman, also with CDM Smith. She is the project manager that actually did both of the 2 drainage studies and the one that she's going to talk about in detail today. Next slide. So a little bit on the agenda, I'm going to give a project overview that's going to be at a very high level. I hope to get through it in about 8 minutes or so, maybe 10. And then at that point, we're going to pause, as was mentioned earlier. And the hope is that maybe through these initial slides, we can answer some of the recurring questions that have been coming in to Mr. Martin. But if there are any high-level questions from anybody that's on, we'd like to pause and let you ask them. If they're detailed questions about a specific area or a house, it may be better for you to hold off on your question, because then as we proceed with the presentation to Cindy Bauman, when she goes through the existing conditions, recommendations, cost, prioritization, the groundwater study, and the next steps, she may answer your question because she's going to do a deeper dive into what actually was studied, what we're recommending, and what the path forward is. So next slide, Cindy. So what is the project objectives? The primary objective of why, CDM Smith was hired, why this is, the town went forward with this, was to address street flooding. Clearly, with the storms over the last few months, you all have experienced it again. You're all well aware of the street flooding. So why is the street flooding occurring? And it's, we need to address the drainage system capacity. One of the questions that we've heard, from various residents is it because the drainage pipes are clogged? The drainage pipes have been televised, inspected within the pipe, and for the most part, we have not found any issue with the drain pipes where it's because of an issue with their clog. They all have their capacity to convey the water. Another common question that we receive is, are there enough catch basins? If I had more catch basins, then I could take the flooding away. But it's not the case. Some areas, in other towns, maybe that would be the case, but in West Hartford, what we've generally found is there are adequate number of catch basins. The issue is that the pipes that are in the street are generally too small. So when Cindy goes through her presentation a little bit, you'll see that in a lot of cases, what we're doing is we're taking an existing pipe, a drain pipe that might be 12-inch diameter, and we're making it something bigger to say an 18-inch or a 24-inch diameter, which will be able to convey this additional capacity of stormwater in the street to reduce the flooding. The secondary objective would be, as Mr. Martin was mentioned, is related to the connection of sump pumps, foundation drains, and roof leaders. And I have a schematic that I will show in a little bit that goes through what exactly these are. So the intent would be is to try to leave drainage connections for these to be removed. And then another secondary benefit of the project is to address the private property flooding. So a lot of you have mentioned that there's flooding in your backyards, and you would like that to get addressed by the project as well. The way that the drainage pipes have been sized based on the study is to accommodate all of the stormwater. So the stormwater that would be coming from your backyards, the pipe is sized for it. But the actual connection of the pipe where that flooding is occurring in the backyard to the street would need to be done by the private property owner. We will leave connections to the property in order for it to be resolved so that you can resolve it, but that actual work would need to be done in coordination with the private property owner. Next slide, Cindy. So stormwater flooding, what is causing it? Well, West Hartford is an urbanized area with high impervious area. So let's break that down a little bit. Urbanized area means that there are a lot of houses. It's very well developed. When West Hartford first started, it wasn't as developed. It was less houses, and as West Hartford grew to the size it is today, obviously more houses filled in the area, and as a result, it created more impervious area. So what is impervious area? Impervious area is where water that falls from the sky cannot permeate into the ground. So it's be surfaces like pavement, the streets, your roof, your driveway, things like that are called impervious area. When there's a high amount of it, there's nowhere for the water to be able to percolate into the ground in areas such as grass. So because of this high urbanized area, this highly urbanized and highly impervious area, it creates more stormwater. We also have had more frequent and high intensity rain events. I don't think I need to explain any of that to anybody on the call. I mean, in the last 4 months, we've had 4 major storms, one of which was over a 200-year storm. The definition of a 200-year storm is it's a storm that is supposed to only occur once in every 200 years. Unfortunately, these storms have been happening at a more frequent pace, lately. And so that's another reason why that's causing this stormwater flooding. Another reason is high groundwater. The town, is generally in an area where it's high groundwater. Trout Brook runs right through much of the drainage area that we studied, and all of the homes around the area have a high groundwater. So even in the areas where you do have grass and the water that falls from the sky could permeate into the ground, because the groundwater is so high, there's nowhere for it to go. And lastly, we have poor draining soils, a lot of clays and things like that, where it doesn't actually allow the stormwater to percolate down into the ground because of the poor draining soils. Another cause for the flooding is, as Mr. Martin mentioned, is sewer surcharging. So the sewer surcharging is separate from the street flooding. The sewer surcharging is caused predominantly from these private property stormwater connections to the sewer system, the sump pumps, the foundation drains, the roof leaders. Those connections don't belong in the sewer system, they belong in the drainage system. And so the sewer system was sized to convey your sanitary sewer and not these private inflow connections. And as a result, they overwhelm the sewer system and they cause it to surcharge, which is a separate act of flooding, which is typically you would see that as the flooding in your basement. Next slide, Cindy. So this schematic gives you an idea of a typical household. And so on the left-hand side, you have what typically would go into a sanitary sewer service would be your toilet, your shower, your sink, the dishwasher, the washing machine. All of those things belong in the sanitary sewer service. But what also is in many of the homes in West Hartford is there are roof leaders that are connected over to the sanitary sewer. There are sump pumps and foundation drains, which is in the bottom right corner, are also connected to the sanitary sewer. Unfortunately, when these houses were built back in, say, the early 1900s to the mid 1900s, it was common for the houses to be built that way. So that's how many of them were done. But nowadays, we now realize that these connections should have been in the drain and not the sewer system. The reason they were put in the sewer system at the time is because they can flow by gravity. The sewer pipe in the street is deeper than the drainage pipe in the street. Typically, sewer pipes are 8 to 12 feet deep in the street, whereas the drainage pipes are usually only, say, 3 to 5 feet deep. So therefore, if you have a foundation drain underneath your basement that's collecting the groundwater, that high groundwater, it would flow by gravity to the sewer, but would not be able to flow by gravity to the drainage system. So in often cases, what you would need to do is to put in a sump pump that would actually pump the groundwater up to the higher elevation where the drainage system is, which is the graphic that is shown on the right-hand side. So what we're talking about with moving forward is to keep the sanitary sewer in the sanitary sewer and remove these private inflow connections, the roof leaders, the foundation drains, and the sump pumps, and connect them over to this properly sized drainage system that would be increased in capacity to take this additional flow with service laterals that be at the property line. Next slide, Cindy. Next thing I wanted to do was give you a quick little overview of the fascinating South Harford Tunnel project. The South Harford Tunnel is a drainage and combined sewer tunnel that basically runs on the right side of the graphic is the east side, southeast side of Hartford. The black circle is actually located at the Harford wastewater treatment plant. The blue line that you see that goes from the right side of the graphic over to the left side of the graphic is the South Harford Conveyance and Storage Tunnel. That tunnel is 18 feet in diameter, and it's 175 to 200 feet below the ground. We have been working on that tunnel for a couple years now. We started on the far right-hand side of this graphic. We've crossed the West Hartford line, which is on the left side of this graphic. We have about 2,000 feet left to go before we hit the black circle, which is where we come out. We think that we will get there by the end of next month. That's where we're hopeful. However, this project has a lot of other things that need to happen in order for it to be active. The circled is all of the consolidation pipes that basically takes flow from West Hartford and brings it to the tunnel. And then the pink circles that you see are called drop shafts. That's where the flow from the surface would then drop down to 200 feet and connect over to the tunnel project. Construction is underway on all of these projects, but it's probably another couple years away. One of the questions that we have gotten is, will that tunnel address all of these, sewer surcharging that's happening in my property, say in the center of town, which is where our study area was. The tunnel was sized to take the surcharging that's down in the southeast corner of West Hartford, where there are actual outfall pipes that discharge combined, like sanitary sewer flow combined with stormwater flow, and it actually discharges to receiving water bodies. So we're looking to connect those up. It will help reduce surcharging in West Hartford, but it will not solve the surcharging issues completely within the study area, which is closer to the center of Hartford. Addressing the project closer to the center of Hartford, the sewer surcharging that's going on there will take the removal of those private connections that I mentioned. Next slide, Cindy. So just quick project timeline. 3 studies were mentioned to you. So the first one was done by another consultant engineering firm. It was completed in 2018. And that study was to look at the drainage culverts on Trout Brook. So there are drainage culverts along Trout Brook that are undersized that are causing some flooding associated with them along Trout Brook. And so that study made recommendations, and there are recommendations in the report to upsize those culverts, which you'll hear more about from Cindy a little bit later. The second study was from CDM Smith, the phase 1 drainage area. And I have a map on the next slide that will show you where the phase 1 versus phase 2 is. But that drainage study was completed by CDM Smith in June of 2020. It was presented to the town council in October of 2020. We had public information meetings November 23rd and 30th for the two different areas within the study area. We did submit a grant application in January of 2021, and as Mr. Martin has mentioned, MDC coordination has been ongoing. The second or third study, the second one completed by CDM Smith, is the one that you will hear the most about tonight, which is the phase 2 drainage study. We just completed this study in August of 2021. Last month, we presented it to the town council. We're here tonight for the public information meeting, and again, the coordination is ongoing. So this is the project that Cindy is going to spend the most time talking about. So the project areas, area 1, 2, and 3 on the right-hand side is what was in phase 1. Areas 4, 5, and 6, which 4 is on the far left-hand side, 5 and 6 are on the northern area of the study area. The colored areas you're seeing were in phase 2. And there was significant flooding in all 6 of these areas, including recent storm events in April and September of 2018. There was the August storm of 2019. 2020, luckily, you should have had some relief, or it was a little bit more of a dry year, but 2021 certainly was the most intense year we've seen in a long time, with the number of peak rain events that have happened throughout the year. Our first public meeting with this overall project was in June of 2019. We completed the phase 1 study area, as I mentioned earlier. This is now, we're talking about the phase 2 study area, which is areas 4 through 6. And this is our third public meeting on the project as a whole tonight. Next slide. Or actually, I think this is the point that we are going to take a break. So at this point, this was a high-level summary. Before we get into a little bit more of the details of phase 1 and phase 2, if there's any high-level questions from any of the public that are on, we'd be happy to hear your questions and try to respond to them.
Thank you, Mr. Liberti. I am going to start now and call on each of the residents who are on the call and ask them if they have any questions for the panel. I will start with Mr. Patel. I've now gone ahead and unmuted you. If you have any comments or questions, you may ask them.
Ms. Reinheimer, I believe Mr. Patel is still muted.
Hey,
Hello?
Hear you,
Hello?
Mr. Patel.
Yes, I have a sleeping baby next to me, so I'm going to put my question in the chat box. I just put my general question. I have more specific questions, but this is a pretty high level or general question I have.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. We are going to honor your question, but we generally do not rely on the chat box, just because it's very hard for the presenters to manage both.
All right, I'll talk quietly. When will the flood maps be updated? The 100-year FEMA maps, or the 1% chance of a storm, is archaic and doesn't present reality as the charts we just went through, considering climate change. So when will we have a flood plan in place that better accurately reflects our current reality?
that's a great question, Cindy. I'm hoping you can back me up on this, because I know you know more of the details of it, but that is not something that is done by CDM Smith. That's done on a national level, I believe, by NOAA or in EPA. Certainly, I agree with you that they should be updated. All we are doing when we say what the storm is based on what the current return frequency of that storm is. But I totally agree with you that these storms are happening in a much more frequent level, and the map should be updated. Cindy, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I do want to add is that the rainfall data does get updated more frequently, and we are using the most frequent, it's Atlas 14, and that's the most frequent or recent rainfall data. So for the design, we're using the higher rainfall data, the more frequent information, but it's really nationally by NOAA or even FEMA that does the map updates. So.
Another question is, West Hartford received $37 million from the American Rescue Plan Act. Why isn't that money being used to replace culverts, for example, that the Commission East Branch Trout Brook report stated was inadequate, even for the current FEMA flood plan. Is there any plans to use that monies to replace some of these culverts or pipes that the town acknowledges is insufficient and causes street flooding and diverts storm water onto people's property and into people's homes?
This is Matt Hart, Town Manager. I'd be happy to answer that. Yes, town staff is recommending that the council appropriate a portion of the rescue plan monies to help finance these projects. And so that's something the council is discussing right now. And the $37 million figure is accurate. We've received $25 million for the municipality, another 12 million in what's called our county-based share because Connecticut does not have counties. And then there's on top of that another 10 million for the school district. But the school district is deciding on how to best utilize the 10 million. So town staff has prepared a recommendation that we've submitted to the council, and the council is reviewing now. Again, we do think the rescue plan funds provides us with a great opportunity to help move some of these projects along in a timely manner.
Okay, and I had one last question, but it pertains specifically to the commissioned East Branch Trout Brook report. Should I hold off on asking that question, or should I ask it now?
What's your preference, Joe?
Well, if it's project related, I think we should probably wait until the end if you're okay with that, in case, I mean, Cindy may go through it, but it's up to you all. Cindy has a bunch of slides that go in details about the study area.
Yeah, we do have a fair amount of the presentation left. We still have a lot of detail to share.
Okay, then I'll wait on for that question.
Thank you. Back to you, Ms. Reinheimer.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Thank you, Mr. Patel. I am now going to go ahead and unmute Amy. Amy, you may unmute your line and ask any questions or state any comments.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Ms. Lucas. Moving on, now unmute Ms. Rosen. I will now unmute EAM. Okay, moving on. Mr. Keenan, if you'd like to make a comment or a question, please unmute your line.
Yeah, thank you. I did have a couple questions. Joe, one thing you said that I thought was interesting, you know, when you're kind of asking these homes to disconnect roof leaders and foundation drains from sort of the sanitary line, you mentioned kind of the solution is to connect them to the town drain system. And maybe that's the only way to do it for the foundation drains. But I would have thought, you know, kind of stormwater would have been managed on site for a lot of these homes. So I was hoping you could kind of clarify that.
Yes, thank you. There have been some properties that have attempted to manage it on site by, say, having their sump pump discharged to the ground, and that certainly is a scenario that is common, what you're saying, piped over to this enlarged and properly sized drain pipe.
Joe, this is Matt. I wonder if you could emphasize that, you know, a lot of our smaller properties in particular, this may not be a good solution for them.
Correct, right. It'd be, and that's what we have in the majority of the area is it's properties that are tight, so there isn't a lot of room for, you know, to create the on-site management of the stormwater from the basement. Or groundwater, I should say, in the basement as well.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and then I guess the follow-up to that is, ultimately a lot of the town system kind of drains into Trout Brook, right? So, I mean, it seems like we're kind of increasing the capacity that'll be needed for Trout Brook. So, again, that river's already has overflowed in some of these recent storm events. So how, what are you doing to kind of, I guess, increase the capacity or, manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Mayor Cantor actually had that right on, where all of these areas that we mentioned are interrelated. So there was the 3 studies, and one of which was that a different engineering firm had looked at Trout Brook and looked at the issues associated with it, with the culverts that are conveying Trout Brook. So part of what would be moved forward is to resolve those bottlenecks on Trout Brook that would then allow this flow to be able to go to it and convey it downstream.
Okay. And is there any channelization planned, or, any like additional stormwater ponds or anything? There's just so much water. It's great that, I guess you're increasing the size of the culverts, but I'd be curious to kind of hear about that a little bit more.
At this time, there isn't any stormwater ponds planned. At this time, it was to evaluate Trout Brook so that it can take the additional flow and to bring the additional flow to Trout Brook.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I will now go ahead and unmute Kyle. Kyle, you're more than welcome to unmute your line and ask any questions or make any comments. Okay, moving on. Ms. Baden, I've unmuted your line. You're welcome to make any comments or ask any questions. Michael, I've now unmuted your line. Mr. Talbot, you're more than welcome to unmute your line and ask any questions or make any comments. Mr. Alderman, you're welcome to unmute your line. Scully? Moving right along. Mr. Tunas? I do apologize if I'm saying these names.
That's okay. No questions at the moment. Look forward to the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Richard, if you'd like to make a comment or ask any questions, I've gone ahead and unmuted your line.
Not at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, Mr. or Mrs. Lawrence? Go ahead now and unmute Steve.
Not at this time.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Mr. and Mrs. Torino.
Hello. Hello, Joe. My name is Chris Torino, and I'm with my wife, Tara. My friend Dwayne knows us well. We live at 17 Wheelchair Lane, right by St. Joseph's University. I have to make a quick comment because I'm going to the same meeting that Mr. Hart is, and my wife will take over. There's a pipe that runs through our backyard, a drainage pipe through all the houses on Wheelchair Lane. It's a 4-footer. And Joe, it was a joke. 2019, it was a joke. And in 2021, it was a joke. Water all the way up to my waist, which is just about 3 feet, flooded garage, flooded basement. So again, we've lived here since 2020. Never saw anything like it. 200-year storm, fine. I don't know what the storm was in 2019. But I just wanted to mention, because you were mentioning 12-inch or 24-inch pipe, and maybe I misunderstood you, but we need a bigger pipe. Like in Jaws, we need a bigger boat. So thank you very much. I just want to make that comment.
Yes, the example I gave of 12 going to a 24, probably I could have used a bigger size. Cindy, how big do the drains get up to at the downstream end?
Well, in that area, the St. Joseph's tributary, I think they get up to there are two 42-inch, and they are both being upsized. And especially the one that goes down Wiltshire and probably behind your properties, because I know it goes cross country and then behind the properties. So I think it's a 60-inch. I'm not remembering the exact number, but I do have it on a slide coming up, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to now unmute Mr. Gleason, and I apologize for missing you. Then I'm going to unmute Mr. Bush, and lastly, Terry, in that order. Mr. Gleason, you are more than welcome to unmute your line.
Okay, good evening, and thank you to everybody. I have a question. Excuse me, I have a dog going crazy in the background. My question follows Mr. Patel's and I believe Jeff Keenan's, but it's a little bit further downstream. Given the long-term nature of this study and the long-term nature of this problem, okay, compounded with an unpoliticized view of climate change. Most of our surface groundwater flows into a riverine system that ends up in the Connecticut River. Is that correct? That's my first question.
Correct.
Okay, so everyone, I think, might assume that because West Hartford is generally above sea level, but where our water goes is not. It is tidal. So what are our projections over 10, 20, 30, and up to 2100 and beyond for the level of the Connecticut River? Because if the Connecticut River backs up, the entire riverine system, the entire Trout Brook drainage system backs up. If you have ever seen the pipes that go under, the conduits that go under Bushnell Park and reach, there's not a lot of room in those pipes for additional flow. So while I applaud the town and everybody involved for increasing drainage from the streets to the Trout Brook system and Kane Street and everything else, what happens over the next 20 and 30 years if that water can't get where it needs to go?
That is a very looking forward thought, and I appreciate it. You know, obviously our study here was to look at addressing the flooding in the town of West Hartford. What you're bringing up is the climate change overall, the rising sea level, and the flooding that could be occurring across the state, which is, you know, likely should be considered a little bit more on the state level. The Connecticut River is tidal. It isn't tidal up to all the way up to Hartford. It's just south of Hartford, it's tidal. But I suppose if what you're saying is with climate change, then that tidal impact could move further north. But Trout Brook discharges.
Joe, I don't want to interrupt because in the interest of time, let's just say, is the conduit capacity of the discharge system of the Trout Brook discharge system of surface water, has it been examined in terms of the ability of the Hartford side of it to process the water into the Connecticut River? Throw sea level out. It's a longer term thing.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. But Mylone and McBroom, the other consultant, was the one that looked at the Trout Brook. So I don't know, Cindy, if you have any details on that, or Mr. Martin, if you do. But Trout Brook ultimately discharges to the south branch of the Park River. And the south branch of the Park River goes into the Park River conduit, which has a relief during flooding. It goes down into the Park River Auxiliary Conduit, which actually has stormwater pump stations that are, it's part of the Flood Commission that is owned and operated by the city of Hartford. So even during a flood in Connecticut River, the Trout Brook, which goes to South Branch, which then goes to the north, which then goes to the Park River Conduit, should be able to be pumped out to the Connecticut River, provided that the pumps that are being maintained by the city of Hartford are working.
And that has been confirmed? The capacity has been confirmed?
So I don't know what my Loaning Broom study included for how far down on Trout Brook they looked at.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I
Do you
do
know,
not
Cindy,
believe
or-
it went that far, but I have to look at their modeling to see.
Well,
I
thank
know
you,
that
Cindy, and
it's on
thank you,
top.
Joe. No, I appreciate it. I'm not trying to cause trouble here. What I'm trying to do is take a look at, something that's long-term for the town, but is really short-term, and then making sure that we're not just pushing water someplace where it's going to come back on us.
Mhm.
Everybody that lives in this neighborhood, and I live right on Middlebrook Road across from St. Joe's College, we know all about pushing water someplace and having it come back on us on a local level. I'm just trying to make sure that, what are the parameters of the study, and is it large enough to think about where is this water going to go for the next 30, 50 years, et cetera. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will now unmute Mr. Bush.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks for putting this meeting together. The opposite of looking so far ahead, I would like to ask some questions regarding solutions to short-term immediate problems that are currently plaguing people, such as people who live on Lynbrook Road who want to tie into the existing stormwater system, but are having difficulty with the hold harmless agreement and the cost. So my first question is there any plan to abate the suffering of the people who are currently, who have participated in the sump pump program to help them tie into the existing stormwater drainage system on Lynbrook? That's one. Do you want to answer that, or should I ask? Because I've got at least one other question.
Dwayne, do you want to field that? I don't think anybody from MDC is on the call.
So this is not an MDC issue. This is a town of West Hartford issue. The residents need to connect directly to the stormwater system, which is in their street, but they're having a difficult time. And it is ultimately a town of West Hartford, according to the people at the MDC that I've spoken to. It's a combination of the town of West Hartford working in conjunction with the MDC to just tie in, a lateral that would go into the storm sewer. So, and I was under the impression that it's not even that expensive a project, and that MDC would be willing to pay for whatever part was theirs to make that happen for these people. Is the town willing to step up and make that payment? I think it's around $5,000 plus or minus, and also just help to get that work done. So I don't know if Matt Hart is on or if Dwayne can answer that, but if that's even because this is one of the things that hasn't been discussed. And, we're talking about this great long-term plan, which is great. And the study so far, the presentation has been spot on, but I think we really need to alleviate the suffering of the people who are currently suffering. So I'm going to assume that we don't have an answer to that question. And I'm going to ask my next question, which is the MDC has a program that provides free sump pumps for people that will help them to stop their stormwater from entering into the sanitary sewer. They will visit the site, come up with a plan, and pay for 100% of the work to discharge the stormwater out into their yard, their side yard, their backyard, assuming that there is an appropriate place to discharge the water, which earlier in this discussion, it was, clearly it is not for everybody. But for the people that it does impact and the people that could benefit from it, there's currently some issues that have arisen between the building department and the MDC regarding who's going to take responsibility and who's going to take liability for that work to be done. I've spoken with Tim McClochie at length, and I understand his point, and I've spoken to the MDC, and I understand their point. I really believe that the town and the MDC need to meet, and we need to come up with a way to continue this program, to get it back on track, and to start to alleviate the symptoms of the people who are currently suffering as we, engage in this much longer, broader project. So I think it's important to start small and work our way to a larger resolution over time. So I don't know if those are questions or statements, but there are certainly issues that I think need to be resolved. And I did want to put them out in this forum because I believe that it's relevant to the discussion. So if anybody wants to, to reply, I would appreciate it. If not, I understand it is a complicated situation. Thank you.
This is Dwayne Martin, the town engineer. It is related, but it was not a component of the drainage study. So I will answer it quickly because I don't want to appear as though we're dodging the questions because they are important and relevant. Homeowners can connect to the town's drainage system. There's no opposition of the town to do that, but there is a document that you refer to as the hold harmless that needs to be signed by the property owners. And that has many reasons why. Some of it spells out in there as to what you can and can't discharge through that system into the town's drainage system. There also is the liability component. Should the drainage system in the street back up for some reason, the town's not responsible for damages related to that, but there are safeguards that can be put into place to reduce, if not eliminate, that from happening. But we do understand that some homeowners don't like the hold harmless agreement, and there's some issues there. We can discuss those individually with those homeowners, but generally speaking, we do allow connections to our drainage system. The town has not been paying for those connections. That's a private property issue. It's not a public safety issue. However, sometimes it does become a public safety issue if the discharge creates an issue in the street. So we're trying to take that into account with this drainage study. If we're installing new drainage along the street, we want to make sure that homeowners have the ability to connect to it. Who actually does that connection is still being figured out, but we are making the pipes big enough to accommodate that flow. So that's the answer to your first question. The second is the MDC's backwater valve program. We are meeting with the MDC. We have been in contact with them even today. We have a meeting set up with them on Monday. We were supposed to meet today. They couldn't make it, unfortunately. So we're working our way through this issue. The town's position on this has not changed. There was a note on the permit, which we put more detail in it, pointing to a building code issue, which is the person or company that installs the sump pump system, including the backwater valve, is responsible for any drainage nuisances that are caused by that. By having the note on the permit application pointing to that code, which we didn't create, it's a building code, it was always there, the contractors for the MDC do not want to accept that liability, and they're backing away now. And by way of the fact of that, the MDC is now backing away and saying the town needs to address this. Well, we didn't really change anything. We just spelled out the code onto the permit so that homeowners know that there could be a drainage nuisance, and this is the path forward if there's a problem. But we are working with the MDC to try and come to common ground to move forward on this. In the meantime, homeowners, if they want to hire a contractor to install a backwater valve and a sump pump and even connect it to our town drainage system, we're fine with that. There's no issue with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am now going to go ahead and unmute Terry.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. I guess, Joe, my first question for you is, you mentioned the 200-year storm event. I guess, everybody's saying trust science, climate control. I mean, isn't it safe to say that we're going to have many, many more of these 100-year, 200-year storm events? I mean, from your professional opinion?
It appears to be the case lately, certainly this year. They started tracking rainfall data are significantly only over the last, say, 100, maybe 150 years. So I don't know if you looked back 1,000 years, if there was these other patterns of, peak rain events versus droughts. I mean, there certainly are times in history where we've gone through 10 years of roughly drought as well, where, of course, you're still getting rain, but you're not getting as much rain as you're supposed to be getting. And at those times, CM Smith also did the state water plan, and ironically, at the time we were doing the state water plan, it was in, that I think it was 16 or 17. There was like a year of drought, and all everybody was talking about was that we were in a drought, and what's the state water plan going to do to solve the drought? And, and then now we're going through periods sometimes where we have heavy rain. I can't answer your question as to, how many more 200-year storms will be coming in the future.
No, I
It
appreciate that. And
it does appear that they're hitting more often than they ever have in the recent past.
I do, and I appreciate your honesty. I mean, one of the other questions I have for you is, what's the status of that grant submission from January of 2021? Can you update us all on where we stand with that grant submission?
So the initial submission was not favorably, did not receive the grant, but we are looking to make an update to the submission. It's due in January of, I believe it's January of 2022, and we are going to update it and submit it on a different grant application that was recommended by the state. I don't know, Dwayne, if you want to add anything to that.
Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer. Yes, so unfortunately we didn't get the grant, Terry. The reasoning behind that was for Connecticut's allotment of grant awards, there was no physical construction. It was studies, essentially, which we've already done, obviously. So the allotment of funds was pretty low for Connecticut. These are competitive grants. However, a number of the Connecticut applications were deemed ineligible. Ours was not. They deemed ours eligible. They liked ours, and they suggested that we submit another grant application for a different grant source, which we are going to do.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions, and Dwayne, these are probably more yours than they are Joe's, so I apologize. Can you explain and tell us what monies are in the CIP plan for improvements, just so we're all on the same page?
Sure. So each year the town has a CIP, which is a capital improvement program. This is a component of the town's greater budget. So every year the town allocates funding for different CIP programs. One of them is our stormwater management program. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 a year that's programmed for the town's drainage system. And that's used for various things, but typically 500,000 doesn't get you anywhere near the amount of funding you would need to do what's recommended in these studies. So that's more just the routine replacement of catch basins for our paving program, doing video assessments in advance of road work. Sometimes we are able to do very small drainage improvements, but oftentimes the funding is just replacing what's there because it's aged and there's some problem. So 500,000 a year. We're looking to use different funding, as was mentioned before, to address the recommendations of these drainage studies.
Thank you. I guess that gets back to, I mean, yeah, you're right. $500,000 does nothing for the residents of West Hartford when you're looking at roughly $200 million in improvements in these areas. That's nothing. And we all know that the reality is we're not going to get a lot of grants and funding. I know you're talking to MDC, some folks like that, but obviously the burden is going to fall back on the taxpayers, which that's important to every one of us, because our taxes never seem to go down, only seem to increase. I also have one other question, Dwayne, and I know it's not directly involved in this study, obviously, but it's money-wise, it is. Can you talk about the catch basins in the Kane Street area that were tied into the sanitary system that now have to be removed and put into storm? Because that's a concerning to me, more importantly, because that's a lot of monies, probably $40 million worth of monies that the town is going to spend over there on a priority and not in the areas of this drainage study. So I think we're all having trouble, to be honest with you, swallowing that.
I can field that one, Mr. Martin. So CM Smith, working for the Hartford MDC, was the one that was doing that evaluation in the Cane Brook area. Basically, that area flows to a combined sewer overflow in Hartford that the MDC is required to address to a one-year storm. And while we were evaluating, looking for answers, we put out flow meters and we found that there was a significant amount of flow coming from West Hartford, which should have been a separated area. We then followed that up with smoke testing and dye testing, and we found, what we thought, was catch basins that were tied directly to the sewer. We're working through that right now. We have not turned over our memo. We have submitted a draft of it to the Hartford MDC, but the Hartford MDC has not submitted that to the town of West Hartford. But it appears that some of those connections are high relief connections and not necessarily direct catch basin connections. But until we work through the final solution of what exactly we found, work it through the MDC, they will then submit it over to the town of West Hartford, and then we can determine what exactly needs to be done.
So I know you can't speak for this, Joe, but I'm more Dwayne. Obviously, he knows it's coming. EPA knows it's coming. DEEP knows it's coming. Everybody knows it's coming. Is it true that this is going to take precedent over the failed storm systems in this part of town where you're doing the studies? And I know, Dwayne, you probably can't answer that without the council, some of the other folks, but I mean, we got to start calling it what it is. I mean, we got big problems, and no offense, 12 years, that's not really going to help the residents of West Hartford much with these failed storm systems.
Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer again. It's difficult for me to answer without actually seeing the results of the study, but what was explained to me initially was 80 catch basins taking runoff and tying it into the sanitary sewer system. But as they continued through their investigations,
went down.
That was lessened quite a bit, and the overflows that they did find connecting the two systems may need to stay. There may be some reason that those need to stay. So again, without having the study to determine exactly what they found and what needs to be done, I don't know. As far as precedent, I would say no. We've completed these studies. In order to address the issues down there, it may require another study, not to the extent of this, but at least to figure out what some possible solutions would be. So, and that may take some time. As far as I'm concerned, the focus is on the recommendations that we're going to get to later on in the presentation tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you. I am now going to unmute the last person on the call, which is a caller. And if your number ends in 30, I have requested that you unmute your line. Because you are on a telephone, you are required to star 6 to unmute your line. If you have a question or a comment, you may ask now. Okay, I guess we are all set with the public forum portion. If members of the public would like to stay on, they are welcome to do so. I'm not sure, it's up to the host and moderator to open it up for questions at the end of their presentation.
Yes, we were going to continue with Cindy Bauman from CDM Smith is going to walk through the details of the phase 2 study and also the costs associated with it, the initial recommendations going forward, and the next steps. So, Cindy, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can march on your way talking about this area and the recommended plan. Cindy, I think you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. My name is Cindy Bauman, and I work with Joe at CDM Smith, and I'm going to go over the more specifics of the phase 2. I do have a slide up right now that says, gives you a summary of what happened in phase 1. So phase 1 included areas 1, 2, and 3. And area 1 is bounded by like Asylum Avenue to the north and Reservoir Avenue to the south. And then area 2 is the one that has Fern Street is the major drainage system and the major road that traverses the middle of that system. And then area 3 includes Loomis Drive, and then the Leonard and the Loomis area, as well as Mount Clair. And so those were completed. This kind of just gives you an overview. We did, for phase one, we did collect and review data. We surveyed the area and performed quite a bit of field work to get a better understanding of the drainage system. We modeled the stormwater systems within all three areas. We came up with alternatives, and then we did come up with recommendations for those systems that were deficient. And so the same scope was done in phase two as well. So phase two, we did the same thing. We went out, we collected data, we surveyed, we got a good understanding of the drainage system, came up we modeled it and came up with recommendations. And so phase two included areas 4, 5, and 6. Area 4 is just to the southwest, adjacent to area 3. And then area 5 is up on St. Joseph's tributary. And then area 6 is around the Yukon campus. And I'm going to kind of go in a little more detail on those areas. So area 4 is on the left side. And area 4, the flow flows in a northeasterly direction. It starts up near Brace Road and Arlington. And then the stormwater system goes down Brunswick and it goes down Arundel Avenue, all flowing in the northerly direction. And then it goes to Fern Street, and then it traverses cross-country to Hilltop Drive, and then cross-country underneath the American School for the Deaf, and then flows still in a northerly direction towards its outlet, which is at Trout Brook and the North Main Street at Lynbrook. And then there's a second system that flows from the north, and it flows in a southerly direction. The main trunk line is down North Main Street, and it flows in a southerly direction towards Trout Brook to pretty much the same location where it intersects on North Main Street with Lynbrook Road. So that's area 4. The middle graphic shows area 5. Area 5 is called the St. Joseph's tributary, and that area actually flows in a southwesterly direction. It starts up near Mohawk Street and Norwood Road, and then it goes southwest. And there are documented flooding locations on Colony at Bernard and Sequin Road. And then it continues southwest, crossing Albany Ave. And then it does flow down Wiltshire Lane, and then it discharges near Wiltshire and Lawler. And that was the area that we were talking about previously with one of the callers. And then area 6 is, there's a lot of little systems. So area 4 and 5 had larger systems, and area 5 is actually just one system. But area 6 actually has 10 smaller systems, and they all flow towards Trout Brook. And Trout Brook runs in a north to southerly direction on the eastern side of this area. And so there's 10 smaller systems that all discharge to Trout Brook. And then this area 6 is the one that also included the Malone and McBroom study that included the culverts for Trout Brook. So the culverts at Albany Ave, and then the one at Lindy Lane. There's a large culvert that goes under Haynes and Lawler. And then there's a smaller culvert that's on the Yukon campus property. And then the final culvert is down at Trout Brook Drive near Asylum Ave. So now I'm going to focus on the phase 2 existing conditions. And I've selected just a few locations to kind of give you an overview. I'm not going to go over all of the drainage systems, but what we did do is we did develop a drainage model. And so we used a computer model to simulate storms running through the existing drainage system. We modeled the 10-year storm, as well as we modeled quite a few historical storm events, the 2018, 2019 storms. And the 10-year storm is actually a storm that has a 10% occurrence in any given year. So after we ran all the existing conditions, the existing systems, we compared the model results with flow metering data and also reported flooding locations. Because during those storm events in 2018 and 2019, the town actually documented locations of flooding within all 3 of the study areas. So this on the right just kind of shows you, this is area 6. It shows you the drainage systems. And it shows you the pipes in yellow and the junctions or the manholes are in green, and then the outfalls, and this is the one that has 10 different outfalls that discharge to Trout Brook. Those are the red triangles. So for each of the areas, I picked one system that I will kind of take a look at and give you some results. So area 4, just to give you an overview, it's 249 acres. It has 4 drainage systems. There's the North Main Street, and that's the one that runs down North Main Street, and then it goes from from north to south, and it discharges to Trout Brook at North Main Street and Lynbrook Road. And then that's that system. Then the Lynbrook Road, there's a little tiny system that's right here that it only includes 4 catch basins and 3 pipes. So there's a real small system there. And then there's the North Main Street South, which is another smaller system that just runs in a northerly direction on North Main Street. And then the large system is the Arundel Avenue system. And the Arundel Avenue system is the one I kind of explained that runs from Brace Road and then goes down Arundel Ave and under the School for the Deaf and discharges to Trout Brook. And in this model representation, you can see that any of the red nodes are nodes that experience flooding, and then any of the blue pipes are the pipes that experience flooding. So you can see in this model, there's quite a few locations where there's either red dots or blue pipes, so that it shows that the existing drainage system does not have a sufficient capacity. So the existing conditions was run, and then the locations where there was significant flooding were at Brace Road, Brunswick Ave, the Whitman and Keeney Avenues, and then also North Main Street near Trout Brook. So now area 5, this area is a large area. It's 205 acres and it has 1 drainage system. And that drainage system starts up at Mohawk Drive, and as I described earlier, it runs down across Albany Ave and down Wiltshire to their discharges. There's 2 pipes that discharge near Lawler and Wiltshire. And so this system has significant flooding along Reynard Road, Sequin Road, Norwood and Colony roads, and the Norwood and Colony actually coincide with the documented flooding that we received from the town in previous storm events. And then there's insufficient capacity documented in the model on Wiltshire, and then Haynes and Lawler as well. And once again, the same thing, if it's a red node, it has insufficient capacity as well as a blue pipe. So. And then for area 6 is a total of 143 acres, and there's 10 drainage systems in this area. And the smaller systems in this area, some of them do have flooding, documented flooding and modeled flooding, and there's like 1 or 2 that do not. But the significant flooding occurs along Cragmore, Asylum, Trout Brook Drive, Lawler, Haynes, and Lindy Lane. And this is all just the drainage system. The flooding that occurs at Lindy Lane, Lawler, and Haynes under the Trout Brook Drive culvert study is part of the Malone and McBroom study. And so what I do have next is just for area 4, 5, and 6. So this is the phase 2 study. We actually have each of the outfalls and the drainage systems listed. And then we have documented whether the existing systems have capacity during that 10-year design storm, and then the historical storms that we looked at. We looked at Tropical Storm Lee. We looked at the 2018 storms. There were 2 storms during that year that we modeled. And then we also looked at the August 2019 storm. And if it has a checkbox in this table, you can then see that it does not have sufficient capacity for those events or that design storm. And so we use these model results to prioritize the various drainage systems within areas 4, 5, and 6. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the private inflow removal. And I know Joe had mentioned a little bit about this earlier. So we did, as part of this study, we looked at all of areas 4, 5, and 6 with respect to the information that MDC had already conducted with respect to which houses have private inflow that needs to be removed from the sewer system and put in the drainage system. And in all 3 areas, 4, 5, and 6, is approximately 600 total buildings that have been identified for private inflow disconnections. And they're shown, this is the top of area 4, so that's North Main Street. And so this graphic does show any of the houses in green have been identified under that MDC program as requiring inflow removal. And so the private inflows should, as Joe explained, be removed from the sewer and disconnected so that it can be connected to the drainage system or provided to flow over land. With this study for areas 4 and 5, there are some of those areas that MDC did not perform the building inspections and did not have recommendations yet. So what we did is we took the averages for other areas within West Hartford and used an approximation for the number of buildings that would require inflow removal. And so there could be additional properties that have not been inspected and or not been identified at this time. So with the private inflow, what we have designed and included in our recommendations are collector drainage systems. And the collector drainage systems include drain extensions and then collector drains. And what I have here is an example of a location where it's already been done, and it's over in the Greenhurst Road area. And so you can see where the red solid lines are drain extensions, and then the dashed lines are collector drains. And so what we did in all areas 4, 5, and 6 is we designed drain extensions for those locations where you did not have drainage in front of your house. So we've extended the drainage to go up towards your property. And then we've also designed collector drains so that from the last manhole or from a catch basin, there can then be a collector drain installed so that your house can then have a location to connect your inflow disconnect. So now I'll go over the recommendations in all 3 areas, areas 4, 5, and 6. So we used the drainage system modeling to come up with recommendations. And all the recommendations are based on a 10-year design storm. So that's a 10% occurrence, the potential for the probability of a 10% in every given year. So, and we developed recommendations in this area right here, which is your Trout Brook Drive area in area 6, shows where the purple are the proposed pipes and the blue are existing pipes that are have sufficient capacity. So you can see like on, see if my cursor works. Yep. On Trout Brook Drive, like this is an existing 18 in black and it needs to be 24. And then as you go downstream, this is an existing 42 that needs to be a 48-inch. So for all areas, we developed recommendations to increase the pipe capacity and the pipe sizes to carry the 10-year design storm. So then we actually took all the recommendations and we developed a prioritization, and we have 3 tiers. So the highest priority are those with documented flooding, and they then have insufficient capacity for both the modeled flooding during a 10-year storm and those 3, there's really 4 because it's Irene and then it's 2 storms in 2018 and 1 in 2019. So those historical events, if we had insufficient capacity in all 3 of those, there's documented flooding, the modeled flooding for the 10-year storm, and the modeled flooding for the historical events, then that system was given a high priority or a tier 1. Then the tier 2, which is a moderate priority, that's where it had modeled flooding during the 10-year storm and also the historical events, but we didn't have any documented flooding from the information that we received from the town. And the last tier is the tier 3, where it just had insufficient capacity during the 10-year storm event. So all of the systems within areas 4, 5, and 6 were then prioritized according to this tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And I'm going to start actually with the prioritization that was done as phase 1. Because what we've done is we've done all the recommendations and prioritizations in phase 1. We've done all the recommendations and prioritizations in phase 2. And then we also took the information from the Malone and McBrome study. And so we're starting to prioritize all of them from all 3 studies. And so this kind of just gives you a summary of the phase 1 prioritizations for areas 4, 5, and 6. And it doesn't include all of the systems because there were a few systems that did not have insufficient capacity during the 10-year storm. And so they were not put into a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. And so I'm going to go over kind of these 3. I picked one from each to give you a little information on what's being recommended for each. These are all 3 are tier 1. And they're also in the 3 different areas. One is in area 4, one is in area 5, and one is in area 6. So I'm going to start with the one on Lawler Road in area 6. So Lawler Road, this is the graphic I showed a little bit before, but you can see the purple pipes are the pipes that are being replaced, and we have the existing and proposed pipe sizes shown on the graphic. And then we've also summarized them in the table. So you can see there's 18-inch pipes. There's about 200 linear feet proposed in the recommendation, all the way up to a 48-inch pipe where there's approximately 400 linear feet of 48-inch. So we have a total of 2,500 linear feet of new pipe within this area, area 6, the Lawler Road improvements. And so we've done this in all of area 6 has the 10 areas as well as areas 4 and area 5. So I will go over the one now in St. Joseph's Tributary. And so this is the graphic. And I know it's kind of hard for you to see, but you can see here it actually goes up to a 54-inch. So the gentleman that had asked a question about the pipe going down Wiltshire and down to the intersection of Wiltshire and Lawler, that is actually proposed to be a 54-inch pipe. And so this gives you an idea of the magnitude and the amount. I mean, the previous slide had about 2,500 linear feet of pipe replacement, but St. Joseph's Tributary is a large system. It's one large system in this whole area 5. And there's about 10,000 linear feet of pipe being recommended to be replaced because it has insufficient capacity. The next one I'm going to go over is just Arundel Ave. So this is one system within area 4. And this one has approximately the same amount of linear foot of pipe replacement as was shown in the St. Joseph's Tributary area. The one thing I wanted to mention with this recommendation on Arundel Ave is there's an area to the right. So what we did is we looked at various alternatives in this area because the entire drainage system has insufficient capacity. But if we could then divert some flow in this area where the red circle is, so it would be diverted to the east down Loomis to an existing outfall on Trout Brook, then it would alleviate the downstream system and it would make it so that the downstream system did not have to be upsized. And so we're taking the flow that's coming down Brace Road and from the southwest that's flowing in the northeasterly direction, and then we're taking it from this point at Arundel Ave down towards North Main Street and then down Loomis to the outfall. And there's an existing outfall that's on Loomis Drive. And so this one did, the alternative did include a diversion. So now I'm going to go a little bit into the costs. And so we do have costs for, this is your areas 1, 2, and 3, which if you were at the previous public meeting, you would have seen these numbers, but this includes all of the recommendations from the areas 1, 2, and 3. And so all of those systems are now included in this overall stormwater improvements that the town is looking at for future CIP projects. The next shows all of the collector drains. So those systems where we were proposing those drain extensions and those collector drains, those costs were all done for areas 1, 2, and 3. And these are the costs for the collector drains and drain extensions. And now for the areas 4, 5, and 6. So 4, 5, and 6, the recommendations for all the tier 1, 2, and 3. You can see that it's $117 million for all those. And you can see like the St. Joseph tributary is a very large improvement, as well as Arundel Ave. And those are the two really large systems that included approximately 10,000 linear feet of new piping. And then for the collector drain analysis that we did for areas 4, 5, and 6, there's 15 million in there for all the improvements to get that I&I into a collector drain or a drain extension so it can get to the drainage system. So then we did take and put together the phase 1, which is areas 1, 2, and 3, and then the phase 2, which is areas 4, 5, and 6. And then we also included the Trout Brook study that was done by Malone and McBroom. So I'm going to give you a little background on that. So as we had mentioned earlier, in September of 2018, Malone and McBroom, who are now SLR, they evaluated the culverts along Trout Brook, and they came up with recommendations to upsize those culverts to decrease the flooding limits and alleviate flooding within the area. So there is the Trout Brook Drive culvert is the most southerly culvert. And then the next one is the Yukon pedestrian culvert. And then there's a Lawler Haynes culvert that has a junction chamber that connects to the Lindy Lane culvert. And then the final upstream culvert is the Albany Avenue culvert. And these are shown in the yellow on the graphic to the right. And these then have been included in our evaluation. So this is all the tier 1s from the phase 1 study for areas 1, 2, and 3, the tier 1 projects for the phase 2 study, which is areas 4, 5, and 6, as well as the tier 1s, which include the culverts from the Malone and McBroom SLR study. So as you can see, for all of the tier 1 projects, there's a total of $103 million of improvements for just the pipe replacements. And then if you decide to do collector drains, drain extensions, you can see the numbers below. And so we have developed costs and recommendations for all of the projects, but we're focusing now with the tier 1 projects. And so this kind of just gives you the overview of all of those projects. And now I have a graphic that may be hard to see, but I kind of wanted to just show you that the tier 1 projects actually landed very well with a little bit in each area. And so you can see that the feet area, which is the area, I'm hoping you can see my cursor. So this area that's blue, this baby blue area to the right, that's in area 1, and that is the feet area. So that's a tier 1 project. There's the Fern Street. So in area 2, going down Fern Street, there's some drainage system improvements. Area 3 is in red, the Mount Clair Drive area, and then also pink is area 3, which is the Lynbrook Road area. Those are tier 1 as well. And then area 4 is the Arundel Avenue. So that's the one on North Main Street that goes under the School for the Deaf and then goes up Arundel Avenue towards Brace Road. And then area 5 is the St. Joseph's tributary, which is this yellow area, which is the one that's near Wiltshire and Albany Ave. And then the Lawler Road West is this green area, and that's Lawler Road, Trout Brook Drive from Lawler Road in a northerly direction. And then we also, the tier 1s include the 5 culvert replacements as well. So you have the Trout Brook Drive culvert replacement, which is this green circle. And then you have the Yukon pedestrian culvert. And then you have the Lindy Lane and the Lawler and Haynes Road culverts. They're this blue circle. And then the most northerly culvert is the Albany Ave culvert, which is like a rose color. And so this graphic, it has been included on the website if you want to zoom in. And when you zoom in, it's a little clearer and you can kind of take a look at what are the tier 1 projects and where they are and what areas they include. So now I'm just going to go over some next steps. And so we do have this public meeting for areas 4, 5, and 6. And then we have a groundwater study that we're doing in area 3. And so we are starting that study. We're going to install some monitoring wells and get a better idea of how the groundwater moves and how levels change within that Linwood and Lynbrook area. And then we are beginning the design of the tier 1 that are in areas 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. So we have selected the Feet area in area 1, the Fern Street system in area 2, the Arundel Avenue system in area 4, the St. Joseph Tributary system in area 5, and then the Lawler Road West in area 6. And then we've also started looking at the design for the culvert replacements at Trout Brook Drive, the Yukon pedestrian culvert, and then also the Lawler Road and Lindy Lane culvert as well. And then we are looking at additional grant and funding opportunities as Joe had mentioned, and then we are doing our ongoing MDC coordination for house inspection and the collector drains. And now to give you just a little bit more on the groundwater study. So the groundwater study is starting right now as we speak. And we are looking at pretty much this area 3 because of the groundwater problems in the Montclair and Lynbrook and Leonard area. And so in that area, the groundwater is very shallow. It's within 5 feet of the ground surface. And so within area 3, there are approximately 85 homes that have groundwater within 5 feet and about 90 homes with groundwater within 10 feet. And the preliminary groundwater study was done as part of phase 1 when we were looking at areas 1, 2, and 3. And so the results of the groundwater study are in that report that can be found online. And this slide just pretty much summarizes what was done at that time. And so we do have an area, this area 3, that's located within a regionally low spot, and it has high groundwater. And so this groundwater study that we're moving forward with to get a better understanding of the groundwater elevations in the area and the potential for groundwater improvements to lower the groundwater in this localized area. And that has been authorized by the town and has been initiated. So the last thing is I'm going to go over just the schedule. So the groundwater study that we just started, we should be finished in the spring of 2022. The initial drainage system design, we should be finished in the winter of 2022-23. And then the initial culvert design for 4 of the 5 culverts should be finished in the winter of 2022 and 2023. And then construction could potentially begin as soon as the spring of 2023. And for all the improvements, or a lot of the improvements, phase construction would occur over the next 20 years, and it is very dependent on the town funding. And so the town funding will guide and dictate what projects will be done at what time. So now I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and unmute Mr. Alderman, who has raised his hand.
Thank you. Cindy, it was a great presentation. I live on Norwood Road, and in the last 25 years, I've noticed that as there's been additions to houses, there's more impervious use of land on Westwood Road, we're having more and more flooding on houses on Norwood. And looking at the diagram for what is currently in existence in the section 5 and the area 5, it looks like there's only one surface drain on Westwood that connects into what's down on Norwood. So you've got all of the uphill houses, all the houses on the east side of Westwood have water going onto Westwood Road. There's virtually nothing on Westwood Road to collect stormwater. And on a lot of those houses, you have uphill properties where the driveway lines up with the property across the street. So that when you have a rain event, you're having rain come down from the east side of the property, downhill to the west side of Westwood, and then coming down through the yards of the people on the east side of Norwood. So you've really got 4 sets of houses or 3 sets of houses all dropping surface water onto Norwood, which may be part of why Norwood is flooding the way it is so much today. I don't know this for a fact. When I moved in 1996, a property owner on Westwood told me there used to be a stormwater system behind the houses on Westwood Road. And I don't know if anybody's looked into that and if that's true. But it would make sense that there would have been a system there because there's a massive amount of water that comes down from the east and west side of Westwood. If there was a system there that could be inspected and upgraded, that would alleviate a lot of the pressure on Norwood Road. I have no knowledge. It was literally a neighbor said that he had been told by the person he bought the house from that there had been a stormwater sewage system on the downhill side, the bottom of the backyards on the west side of Westwood Road. It would be great if somebody could look into that and find out if there is, in fact, an old system there that could be looked into. Because as I've spoken to, I've been in the house for 25 years, but as I've spoken to people who've lived here longer than we have, there's a perception that there's a lot more water getting to Norwood Road than there used to be. Not just when there's a big storm. We all expect more water when you've got the 10-year storm or the 100-year storm. But just on a regular basis, it seems like every time it rains, there's more water getting to Norwood than we used to see. And people that have been there longer than I have, people in the 30 years, have said they've noticed it with each rain that it seems to be getting worse. And so I don't know if the solution is, catch basins on Westwood to catch some of the water coming downhill from the east side of the street, or whether it's looking at an old system, but it would be great if somebody could look at what's coming down from Westwood.
Yeah, so our drainage evaluation did show that there's only like 2 or 3 catch basins on Westwood that then go cross country. So like the second house in from Mohawk Drive, there's a pipe that goes in between the second and third house that goes towards Norwood, but there was no drainage on Westwood. But we do, as part of our recommendation, we do have a drain extension on that road to provide you with drainage so that you can tie in your sump pumps if you need to. But also that does help alleviate flooding on Westwood Road.
I think that would make a huge difference. The number of houses on Norwood Road, a lot of my neighbors had asked me to comment that there was many more basements are flooding much more often on Norwood. And the sense is that it would be great if we could capture some of the water before it comes downhill from Westwood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am now going to unmute. I'm going to give someone an opportunity who has not asked a question first. So I will unmute Ms. Rosen. Ms. Rosen? Okay, moving on to Mr. Restelli.
Good evening. Yeah, I live right at the ground zero in the section 6, where Haynes Road meets Trout Brook and the East Branch of Trout Brook comes over the banks. A lot more recently and a lot worse than it ever has. We've been here 25 years. We received 5 feet of water in our basement over the last 2 storms because it blew a hole through the slab in our basement. I understand there's a step process to fixing the culverts for the Trout Brook East Branch. How quickly can it be prioritized if you're just going to start designing the culverts next winter? It seems to me we have a really severe situation flooding wise here. It's not just the storm drains, it's really the brook itself. And nothing is being done to control that up till now.
Well, the culverts are the top priority, and they are being prioritized over the drainage systems. But you do have to start downstream to upstream. So we are starting with the Trout Brook Drive that's down near Asylum Ave, and then the Yukon culvert, and then the culvert near where you're talking about, the Lawler to Haynes to Lindy. But all 3 of those are in the design that's being initiated, within the next few months and going to be completed by the winter, like within a year. So all 4 of those culverts are included in that design. So they could potentially start construction in 2023.
Okay, I guess my concern is that this study was published in 2018. The problem's been known about for years. The design should be up and ready to go once the funding was available. And you've just had $37 million dropped in your lap by the federal government. Now's the time. Nobody is occupying the Yukon property. Rip out that culvert while it's not being used and just have it be an open stream until you can fix it. There really should be some type of sense of urgency of getting this done. I've talked to a lot of my neighbors. A lot of people are very upset. Everybody's property values are taking a dive because we're all living in a flood zone that now really floods. Not just a little water, not a little wet vac in the basement situation. We're getting pounded. I have water up against my basement foundation on these floods, and it found a way into my house. So the idea that this is a problem that we're getting to, it just seems beyond the pale to me because it's been known about for quite a long time. Thank you.
Just so you do know is that the study did include recommendations, but like the permitting hasn't been done. The recommendations were all based on aerial photography and not ground survey. So we are going to do survey. We're going to do geotechnical borings. So there are recommendations in that study, but the actual design has not been completed. So that's what we are initiating now. And the culverts are the top priority.
Okay, well, I'm 60 years old, so I guess maybe I'll live to see the final result of what happens. Thanks.
Thank you. I am now going to attempt to unmute Ms. Rosen again. Ms. Rosen, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is that on the Arundel one, the alternative that you chose, there were 3, when I read the study, there were 3 potential alternatives to remediate that area. And that one that you chose was more expensive than, I think, one of the other ones. So it was the most expensive one. Was the reason you chose it because it was easier to do that Loomis Drive diversion? That's my first question.
So there were 3 alternatives, and the most expensive alternative was all drainage system replacements. The second most expensive was the diversion culvert. And then the third, we actually looked at some upstream storage, and there still had to be some drainage system improvements. But the costs that were not included, that if you read the report, in that alternative is that the property, there were concerns with the ownership of the property and actually acquiring and putting the storage at that location. So, and if you notice, the storage option and the Arundel diversion culvert, they were pretty close in cost. It was the whole drainage system that was significantly higher. So we went with it more because we felt it was a better option to alleviate the flooding in that Brace Road area and the upper part of the watershed, and also to decrease the downstream improvements that would not be required because of the diversion.
And my second question is, it's probably, it adds on to what the gentleman that just spoke talked about, is that, the town is aware of this issue. And has a study that's been done. What's the town's liability at this point for all of the issues that occur because the town, there's really nothing, as a property owner, it appears that there's nothing I can do to stop the flooding, that it's out of my, I can put 6 sump pumps, because I have a couple of sump pumps in my basement, it doesn't work. So what's the town's liability at this point? They know what the issues are, and what's their liability in terms of what may happen in the future to the property owners in those locations if they don't do anything?
Is that one, Dwayne, that you may want to take? Okay.
Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer. So I'm an engineer, I'm not an attorney. So liability is a little touchy for an engineer to answer, but my understanding is that because of the natural impact from storms, it's not as if the town is negligent. We're not causing flow to be directed at anyone's property in particular, and quite frankly, it's difficult to construct the drainage system that can handle every storm event just because of the sheer volume and intensity. But this is a massive step forward for the town to complete these studies and commit funding to address some of these. But it's important to note that the recommendations from the studies in some cases will not eliminate street flooding. It will definitely reduce the frequency and the amount of time that streets are flooded, but there still may be, unfortunately, street and property flooding that comes even after the improvements. But this is still a worthwhile endeavor, and we are committed to it. But as far as liability, can the town be sued now that these drainage studies were completed? If for some reason we don't do the improvements or something changes, I don't believe the town can be held liable, because it's nothing that we're doing nefariously or intending to damage anyone's property.
No, I understand that, but as a property owner, for example, if I'm aware that I have a problem with a tree in my property, and I know about the tree and it's hanging over somebody, and somebody walks on my sidewalk and gets hit by it, I'm aware of the problem. I didn't do anything to cause the tree to have a problem, but if the tree causes a problem to something else because I was aware of it, then I assume that I'm liable for that. And how would that be different than what the town would be liable for?
Well, again, I'm not an attorney, so I can't really speak to the tree issue, and it may be different for various reasons, but it's a difficult one to answer. But my understanding is that because it's an act of nature, these flooding events, that as long as the town is doing the best it can to address them once it knows of the solutions, and we're not doing anything to intentionally damage somebody's property or cause harm to public safety, then the town isn't held liable.
This is Joe Lalivity with CDM Smith, and I'm certainly not going to speak to the liability question, but I will say that, I'm sure that I sense the frustration. I'm sure that the flooding's been going on for years, but, it was, I think, predominantly brought to like the, engineers' attention a few years ago. They embarked on this study. I applaud them for embarking on the study. Studies take time, unfortunately. We made recommendations. Those numbers that we put forward were huge numbers. I mean, we're talking about greater than $100 million. And work with a lot of communities across Connecticut. And sometimes when they see, the community sees that $100 number, they say, thank you for the report, and they stick it on the shelf, and that's the end of it, right? I don't even know where to begin because it's too much. But the town is moving forward. They're looking to engage the final design. They understand that there's a lot to be solved, but I applaud them for moving to the next step. We're talking about trying to get the design undergoing within the next month or two. We're looking to prioritize the area and do some work in multiple areas because that we don't want to do too much in one area, but then a certain area gets totally ignored. So we're going to move forward. At this point, the quickest we can get there is what we said. It probably would be as soon as the spring of 2023, allowing 2022 to do the design, and then they're lining up funding to do the construction as best they can starting in 2023. So
And I'm not meaning to say that I don't think the town is making a good faith effort to do what they're, but there's also history where there are other places within the town. For example, the 4 Mile Road area behind the center of town, where the town has actually done remediation, where there were areas where they had problems back there. So again, I'm not accusing the town of not trying to do what they, in the best effort, but the idea that they understand now what the issues are. And I understand that the issue of the money is involved, but as a taxpayer, it's also, I mean, if there's a liability issue involved there, that's also would reflect upon the taxpayers also. And I'm not going to belabor the point any longer, but I just was curious to know about that. And actually, again, I applaud the town for doing what they're doing. And I understand where it costs a fair amount of money to embark on that. But it's not like this is something that just really, I mean, certainly some of the culverts in the Troutbrook Road issues have been going on a long time. It's not just the study that put those to people's attention. And where I live, the flooding is not something that just occurred within the last couple of years. It obviously is getting worse, but it's not something that just occurred within the last couple of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am now going to go ahead and unmute Ann Dugas.
Hi, thank you so much. I am living in Area 5. I'm actually on Westwood Road, and I'm one of the properties that is along the cross-country line. And there are only 2 catch basins on our street, and they both drain through the cross-country drain, and we're right at the low point of the street. And what happens, and what's happened in the remnants of Fred was that we took on all of the street's water, and we got several feet of water rushing into our basement from both the front and then the side, which is our garage. And I didn't see anything on your graphic. Actually, I saw that cross-country line was blue, which I thought you had said wasn't going to be any changes to. So I was wondering, on Westwood, and I understand Norwood is a problem too, how are we going to address the problem to get, this water away from the houses?
I can answer this one. It's Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer, and I believe my staff has been in contact with you.
They did come out. Yep, they came for a site visit.
Yeah, and well, kind of related to this in a sense is that there's other areas of town outside these drainage studies where we have flooding. I'm not gonna ignore that. And so we're trying to investigate and come up with solutions for those as well. And there are areas within the drainage studies where we may try to address them separately. So this may be one of them. I believe, if I'm recalling correctly from Julie Vera from my office, there was a talk about adding curbing and trying to keep the runoff in the street while we investigate.
Definitely. Adding the curbs and then extending it to Mohawk, I believe.
Right, and because as an engineer, I don't like relying on cross-country drainage systems. They are prone to failure, and so we will look into that and of course coordinate both of those efforts with you as we go forward.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I apologize. I didn't realize it was separate from this. I saw this was included in the study, so I thought.
No, you're correct. It is in the study area, so it is a valid question. But there are, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the town has CIP funding around 500,000 a year. Those improvements that I just mentioned are a better fit for that as opposed to the greater project that we're talking about tonight.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I will now go ahead and unmute Mr. Bush.
Thanks for this entire thing. I've been following this since the very first day when this all started back in 2018, and the amount of distance covered between then and now is immense. And I certainly want to applaud the effort of CDM Smith and the town and everybody who's worked very hard on this project. I'm pleased. Obviously, people are concerned and they want it to move faster, but you know, the reality of it is it's a very large project, and I think that we should all be content to know that it's at least moving in the right direction. I only have one quick question or one comment. Did I hear earlier sometime that this all of the new planning is only taking into consideration a 10-year storm event? Was that the what I heard? And if so, what would the difference in cost be for a 10-year storm event versus a 25-year storm event, for example? So anyway, that's all. That's my only question.
So for the drainage systems that are in the roadway, they are typically designed for a 10-year. But for the culverts, they actually have a 100-year design. So because they're a riverine system as opposed to a drainage system in a roadway. So.
And is there an option to increase the roadway designs to a larger, to a 20, for example, a 25-year? And I forgive me for not knowing exactly what I'm asking here. I don't know how difficult it is or how expensive it would be, but is it, how much cost would it add to design to a 25-year storm instead of a 10-year storm?
We have not looked at that for this project yet, but we have done it with other municipalities where we look at a 10-year versus a 25-year. Because like industry standard is 10-year, but I do have municipalities that are trying to do a higher level of protection. And so we will probably look at just the cost differential. I don't know that at this time because this whole study was just based on the 10-year design storm, which is industry standard. So
And
it
I
is
would
a
just add,
larger.
sorry,
It is
I thought,
a larger rainfall, though. If we were to design this 5 years ago, it would have been a different rainfall because recently they came out with that new rainfall, which is the Atlas 14, which is a lot higher. It's based on more recent storm events and the statistical analysis of those. So we do have the 10 years higher than it would have been if we would have designed it like 5 years ago. So.
I would just add, Rick, you know, obviously a 200-year storm is a tremendous storm, but you know, when Cindy's talking about designing to the 10-year, typically we're trying to have the 10-year flow stay within the pipe. It actually winds up that pipe can convey more than 10 years, right? Because if the pipe was surcharged, it's going to push a lot more flow. I don't know about a 200-year storm, but it's certainly, you know, just taking your undersized drains and sizing them even just to 10-year is going to make a tremendous difference, even in the flooding that you've seen. It's not going to solve it completely, but it would be a noticeable difference if you had, you know, one of the examples that Cindy gave earlier, you know, the 42 going to a 60-inch pipe. You know, I actually went on my calculator and roughly did the math because I don't think everybody understands. Like a 60-inch pipe conveys twice the capacity of a 42-inch pipe. You know, and so when you're dealing with even just bumping up pipe sizes a little bit, it's going to convey a lot more flow. It certainly would help a lot. But I think Cindy answered your question as well, that we could look at, you know, if the town wants us to, what that increase would be to size the drains to a 25-year and see what that increase is. But I guess what I'm saying is that it should be able to convey more than a 10-year.
That's good information to know the double capacity with it. You wouldn't just think about that by hearing going from 42 to 60, but it does make sense. Great. Again, I just want to thank you guys for what I consider to be a pretty thorough presentation. I'm sure there's going to still be more questions that other people are going to have as it goes along, and then especially when it gets into the town council for some approvals and the money starts to flow, it's going to probably be scrutinized even further. But thank you very much for the effort that you guys have put forth so far. I appreciate it.
And another comment that I'd like to make is just that there's standard pipe sizes and they're like every 6 inches. So there's an 18, a 24, a 30. Like you wouldn't put in a 19-inch pipe if that's what you needed, because it's not one that you find on the shelf. You know, that you can't buy it. It's special made. So like all the systems, even though we use a 10-year, they typically carry a larger than a 10-year because we have to use those standard pipe sizes. So.
Thank you. I will now unmute Mr. Keeman.
Hi, this is actually Jeff's wife, Victoria. So I wanted to chime in. I was looking at slide 26, where it talks about drainage system prioritization in the high priority area. It mentions areas with documented flooding. What's the process as far as having your flooding documented? No one from CM Smith or the town has ever contacted us to say, hey, have you flooded? And we have experienced flooding. Looking at some of the maps too, it seems like we're in area 4, but we're not necessarily, we're on Windwood Road. So we're kind of across from Lynbrook. So I'm just curious, is there someone we should be contacting when flooding does occur?
Do you want me to start, Dwayne, and then you can chime in? Because for our modeling, we had information from the town for 2 storms in 2018 and a storm in 2019, and then Hurricane Irene. And so they had already had information that the town gathered, the engineering, the highway, the fire department, and they had highlighted it on a map. So if anyone had called in a complaint or notified the town during those 4 storm events, Hurricane Irene, the 2 storms in 2018, and then the 2019 storm, then that's the information that we had. And that's what we were trying to just make sure that our model showed flooding during, when we modeled that storm, for example, Hurricane Irene, and someone documented that there were flooding at this intersection, that our model was showing that there was flooding during that same storm that was documented. So that's kind of also how we made sure our model was correctly showing what was happening out there. So I don't know, Dwayne, if you have anything to add.
Thanks, Diddy. Yeah, I'll add a couple comments. Dwayne Martin, town engineer. So in the past, and sometimes we continue doing this, and we did this in August and in a couple of storms after that, I'll have staff go out individually and mark where they see street flooding. So the primary focus of the drainage study was street flooding, just from a public safety standpoint, to allow emergency vehicles to get to where they need to, or for people to exit their home to get to the hospital or whatever the case may be. There are other objectives of the study as well, and some of that street flooding can go on to properties and flood houses. So we have a pretty good track record or history of where the streets flood in West Hartford. The most recent flood event, the town created an email, the Office of Emergency Management. There was an email created where residents could send information in, pictures, videos, and talk about flooding on their property or in their basement. So we collected that data from the last storm. And that's probably a practice that will continue on with major storm events, not just flooding, but in this case, flooding.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So this is Jeff. Just kind of following up on that, I guess. I mean, again, our property did flood there. We're kind of at, it's interesting to see how sort of the storm drain system works in this part of town, kind of coming down North Main from Asylum, and then as well as the Arundel area. So I guess it feels like with kind of widening the pipes, there'll be more water coming. And then, with kind of the offset to that, that I previously had asked about was I was told there'll be kind of some culverts downstream, but when I look at kind of the culverts, they're more on the Yukon campus. I don't think that's really downstream. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is it feels like there's more water coming our way. We've already flooded, and there's no culverts that are going to kind of open things up downstream. So I'm fairly concerned about it. Maybe more of a statement than a question, but maybe someone can help me out here.
I can start, and then Cindy, I don't know if you want to pull up the graphic. It may be helpful for the area that where he lives in the Wynwood area. But I think for your area, which is the Arundel, there were 3 different alternatives, and we looked at alternatives to replace a lot of that drainage system, including going all the way to the west branch of Trout Brook near your property. And for various reasons, cost, the fact that we would be increasing pipes across private properties, which I don't like doing, we opted not to do that one. Instead, we're looking to do the one where we're intercepting the drainage system and giving it another path, which goes towards Loomis Drive. So with that alternative, once it gets completed, of course, there should be capacity for more drainage in the system, but not sending it towards your property. It would go to the Trout Brook flood control facility through Loomis Drive.
Okay, great. Yeah, I got a little confused. I thought the Loomis Drive solution wasn't available for some reason. I got a little lost there, so I appreciate that.
Sure.
Then my wife had one follow-up there.
One follow-up, just regarding, you mentioned an email area where people could, and during the last storm, notify the town that they had experienced flooding. Just maybe we were not made aware of this, and certainly, like, I understand that some of the documentation was off of, reaching out and people who called the fire department. But if you're someone like us, where we just independently kind of took care of our flooding, and you could go undocumented, and so I just want to maybe call out that it might behoove everybody who's trying to, I understand the town wants to solve this problem as much as the homeowners do, to have a good look at the big picture of everybody who's experiencing flooding. It might be beneficial to really publicize maybe that email that, more, so that way, in these events, people like us who didn't know there was somewhere, didn't know we should be notifying the town, our, voice what's going on.
Again, Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer, thank you for that feedback. I'll tell you the email now. It's pretty straightforward. I believe it's going to be used for any other future event. It is the letters OEM, which is Office of Emergency Management, OEM at westhartfordct.gov. I thought that there was a media blast promoting that email address and asking for residents, if they wanted to, you're not obligated to, of course, send pictures, videos, and any other information to pass along.
Yeah, I never saw that, but thank you. I appreciate, I think that would be just very helpful for us.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now go ahead and unmute Mr. Alderman. Okay, moving on. I will go ahead and unmute Mr. Gleason. Mr. Gleason? You need to unmute, press unmute when you see my request pop up. There you go.
Okay, thanks. My first question back at the beginning of the thing was on the big picture. And thank you all for your participation and for your excellent input tonight. I'm a resident in the FEAT area, and I have a couple of, and I grew up in the city of Hartford, so I know the North Park River, aka the Hog River, rather well. And for the last 20 years, I've been a resident of West Hartford. And whenever I look at a building, I always, or a single home, I always say, wow, what's the drainage? Where does this water go? So I appreciate the efforts of everybody. Christine and Dwayne, specifically, I live on Middlebrook Road. Our low-lying area here is at the corner of Middlebrook and Auburn. That's typically where our flooding occurs. I'm wondering if it shows up on your map. And then I have, which we had kayaks in the most recent storm. We also have kayaks from 30 years ago. So we know we're in a low-lying area here. My question is there a map of every single point of like 42 and 48 foot, 36 to use your, Christine, 36, 42, 48 foot drainage points? We have one at the bottom of a hill that is not, it's at the corner of private property, but the flow that it handles from the hill on North Quaker would suggest that it is no French drain. It has to run somewhere. Do you have that on your maps? Or where, and I'm not putting you on the spot, where do I go to find that? To see whether it is a municipal drain? I can't imagine that it's not, but does such a map exist?
So that is area 1, and we did analyze that feet area, and there is at the bottom, and I forget the road, like what's the main road that runs in a east-west direction where it intersects with like Cumberland and Griswold?
It would be Middlebrook and Auburn.
Okay, so, and then at the very bottom though, like once it gets towards Griswold, because the drainage system comes down that road, and once it gets towards like Griswold Drive, it actually goes cross country, and I think that's what you're talking about. It goes like in between houses and behind houses, and it discharges to the brook. And so we do have that, no?
I'm actually, what I'm talking about, I think that you're probably, and please bear with me, I think you're looking at the storm drains, okay? And your analysis is correct. What I'm talking about is a 42-inch or a 48-inch inflow into that storm drain that is somewhere near the confluence of those two streets, but perhaps on private property. And again, I'm not holding you guys responsible.
I'm wondering if,
for that.
could you do me a favor and look at the report that's on the website for your area, and then like kind of maybe circle a map or something that's on there so that we can make sure that we have it shown correctly?
I can certainly document it. I'm pretty fluent on all that stuff. I can find you on email and stuff, right? And send you the information. Okay.
Yes.
And I'll do that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
My
Yeah.
my only other comment, besides thanking everybody for a really, really good presentation, was that if West Hartford is looking to attract people to come to the town, take advantage of the wonderful services that we have here, and this is regards to the 10-year planning. Mortgages are 30 years. I'm not sure anybody is reassured in these times of climate change, et cetera, that our future planning is 10 years. And they're about to lay down money to buy a home here and pay taxes here for 30 years. And that's not on you guys' shoulders, I understand that. But just as a thought, okay, in terms of future planning, I would think that the minimum thing should be an annual, a mortgage, a 30-year mortgage. But again, that has to be kicked upstairs. It's way out of my pay grade, probably out of everyone else's. Again, I'd only close with thanking everybody for wonderful input, and I appreciate the work that you've done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have to make an announcement. At the moment, I just would like to announce that the interpreters and the sign language personnel is now going to be stopping their services. So if anyone that is watching, if you still need those services, please call me as soon as possible. Please call 860-561-7440. Again, the phone number is 860-561-7440. Thank you. I am also going to go ahead now and unmute all of the lines. Anyone who has not spoken, who has not made a comment or has a question, please let us know now so that we can put you in the queue. Thank you. All of the lines have been unmuted. Please unmute yourself if you still have a comment or question to make.
Hello, I'm a resident of Haynes Road. We are new homeowners. Actually, we purchased our home about a year ago. I did reach out to Dwayne Martin, and you called me back twice. So right when I reached out to you regarding flooding on our road, I received a letter in our mailbox stating that we are having this forum today. So this is perfect timing. I do have some concerns. Again, my neighbor who I live directly next to, he spoke regarding, I guess you call it the culvert. I'm trying to, learn all the phrases and the new terminology as a new homeowner here regarding flooding. Since we were heavily impacted from that last storm 2 months ago, our whole bottom floor of our home was flooded out, and we're going through the whole insurance claim policy and everything like that. So I just let me get to my question. So we're at the bottom of Haynes Road, and I noticed in the presentation that Haynes Road only had one check mark, which put us in the priority phase 2 section. I guess my concern is, since we're at the bottom of Haynes Road and Trout Brook, and the other side of Trout Brook and Haynes Road, all the water runs down, and I heard a resident kind of refer to this happening on her street as well. We caught all that water on top of, the Trout Brook culvert that we have as well. So we had, again, like 4 feet. Our foundation didn't go out like our neighbor. However, it's still a concern. We only have 2 drainage outlets right there at the bottom of our street. So I was wondering if that was in the plan. I sat through the whole presentation, but it is very high level, so I'm trying to, again, get the terminology and really follow what the plan is for us. And then secondly, I know you started the study in 2018, several years back now, going back to what some of the residents already talked about, global warming, 2021. And talking with the residents that are beside me who've lived in their homes for 20, 30 years, seeing the changes that we're having on Haynes Road with our flooding, it kind of seems like some of that data would be obsolete at this point as the weather has changed and we have flooded out, and it's so hard, it's heart aching to see, like, my neighbor flood his whole basement and not be able to stay in his home. for 1 week, and then 2 weeks later we have another storm and the same exact thing. He has to evacuate, and we're kind of on pins and needles, like, oh my God, is our house going to flood again? So it's I understand the work that's being done, but as a new homeowner, our first time homeowner here in West Hartford, it's a really scary process to kind of be on pins and needles every time you hear that it's going to rain outside your house. So again, my two questions, one is regarding the 2 drainage outlets that we have on the bottom of Haynes Road and Trout Brook. And then 2, you know, do you feel like the data from 2018 and those current storms is obsolete for what we're seeing right now, and how are you going to fix that so that the data that is coming in now is current, so that we can, you know, get bumped up if need be to a higher priority? So that's what I have to say.
If
So I want to start by just explaining that the Haynes Road that's on the list for the drainage system, there's the Haynes Road drainage system, but there's also the Haynes Road and Lawler Road culvert. So the culvert is a priority 1, and that is included in our current tier 1 projects. But like the drainage system on Haynes Road, which is just your like catch basins and pipes, that's in a tier 2. And so the main flooding that you see from the larger culverts that carry the Trout Brook, they're in the study and they are tier 1. Did you have something, Dwayne?
Yeah, it's Dwayne, the town engineer. I just wanted to confirm your house number, just to make sure we're giving you the accurate information. What is your house number on Haynes?
Yes, I'm house number 63. It's 63 Haynes Road.
All right, yeah, then what Cindy said is completely correct. So you're impacted by flooding caused by an undersized culvert. That's a high priority. It's planned for replacement. You, along with approximately 25 to 30 property owners in that general area, are affected by those culverts. So with the culvert replacements, you should be removed from the 100-year floodplain. So we're not talking about a 10-year storm at that point. You're talking about being safe from flooding from a much larger storm event.
This is Joe Laliberte with CDM Smith. Just to add, I appreciate the comment on learning the lingo. As engineers, we've been dealing with this for our entire careers, and I'm sorry about that if we didn't get down to it. But basically, all the drainage pipes, they feed into these culverts and into Trout Brook. So Trout Brook is the spine that's running through this entire area that's taking all the drainage from the area. And some of the culverts, which is when Trout Brook crosses under a street, we refer to that as a culvert. It's for Trout Brook. Those typically are sized for a 100-year storm. Those culverts are undersized and they need to be upsized, and they're tier 1 priority. All of the drainage that we're talking about in the specific areas that Cindy was talking about, areas 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they will wind up, for the most part, feeding down towards Trout Brook in these culverts, which is why the culverts need to be upsized first, to make sure that we don't exasperate the problem. We solve the problem before we start bringing additional flow to it.
Okay, and changing the culverts, the timeline on that's one of the projects that are getting ready to start within like the next 30 days, but has a, you know, an ending deadline of when?
Well, it requires the whole design, which is what Cindy Bauman from CDM Smith was saying. So the construction of the culverts would start in 2023. It'll take a year for the permitting, the geotech, the survey, the designs. So it likely would be 2023, and that culvert that where you are is roughly, I think, the 3rd or 4th culvert up from the bottom, and you can't just upsize a culvert in the middle. So the first culvert that will need to be upsized is the furthest downstream, and then work their way up. So it is coming, relief is coming, but it needs to be done systematically.
Okay. Are there any short-term solutions where we can protect our property in the meantime before 2023? Because, I mean, we've had significant damage, upwards of like $50,000 worth of damage. As a new homeowner, to kind of have this in the back of our mind, like, oh my God, this can happen again, maybe twice every year or more, with the way that the weather is going. Is there anything that we can do as property owners to, again, protect our property? Are there any plans that the town can take, just a short-term solution to like really help and support us? I do appreciate all the data that you guys have, put together over the time, but something is kind of, you're sitting here and we're just kind of just like ducks waiting for it to happen again. So is there any short-term solutions that we can implement?
So I do you want to answer that first, Dwayne, or do you want me to?
Let me jump in and then you can add on. Sorry, Cindy. Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer. I was just going to say every property is different, but one of the things that we always try to discuss with homeowners that are new to this or may not be familiar with what's going on their property is try to figure out how the water is getting into your house, which sounds simple, but sometimes it's not. But if you can isolate where it's coming into the house and then figure out ways to prevent it, and sometimes there are some easier solutions, like it could be coming in through a window well, or maybe your downspouts discharge too close to the home. That doesn't sound like that's the case for you, though. For you, because you're close to the culverts, it's probably more like sandbags. Maybe water's getting in through your garage door. You may have to put sandbags down to prevent it from going into the garage, as an example. But every property is different. If it's basement flooding from groundwater or from a sanitary sewer surcharge, it gets much more complicated than simply runoff getting to the foundation or into a window well or something like that.
Yeah, Dwayne, our issue, all the water came in through our garage. And then into our den and into our basement and all the lower level. So that's where the water is coming from. But we do have a sump pump. There's nowhere for the sump pump to pump the water out at that time. It was like a lake on our street. So I'm not sure how effective, the sandbags would be to stop water at that point for the amount of water we had. But, if there was, I don't know, if there's like a resource sheet or something, whereas, hey, these are, short-term solutions for homeowners that are new homeowners or even older homeowners who haven't experienced flooding, that could be very resourceful for the residents. Sorry, I have my daughter here.
So that's what I was going to touch on more is there's like non-structural, they call them non-structural floodproofing measures. And I do have a lot of information on that because some towns find that they can't really alleviate the flooding because it's either like too widespread and like in a lot of locations where people live in the floodplain next to a river. And so there are non-structural. And I'm not going to go into those now, but I will provide that information to Dwayne so he can maybe put it on the website and maybe also forward it to you as well. But it's putting in measures that would protect doorways or protect like your driveway. And they're ones that then you manually put them in place. Like the ones I'm thinking of are more like you put them in a doorway and they actually like click into like a bracket and they prevent water from flowing in, or you can do a similar thing around a bulkhead, or you can kind of do a little like wall, like to put a gate that's flood-proof gate up in front of your driveway. But there's a lot of different little things, and I'll send that information to Dwayne and then he can provide it. So.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. And again, I thank you all for putting the information together. I'm sorry, I have my baby in the back. Putting the information together and taking time to talk to, someone who's a newer homeowner, a newer resident of your town. And, I appreciate all the resources that are out there. So thank you.
It's Dwayne. One more thing. I don't know that I have your contact information. So if you want to call me or email me, I'll forward that information to you when I receive it from Cindy.
Absolutely. I'll email you, Dwayne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone else wishes to speak, please unmute yourself now. Okay, seeing no one unmuted, I am going to go ahead and lock all of the lines. When we are all set with the public comment portion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate everybody's time. Joe. I don't know if you guys heard that. I got muted. I just wanted to thank everybody for attending, and Joe and Cindy, thank you for the great presentation. Hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for all your feedback and comments.